Hello, writers, memoirists, positivists, optimists, resilienциsts. I'm Grant Faulkner, and I'm feeling very uplifted today because we're doing a very special episode that is dear to my heart for a number of reasons. Today, we're doing another episode as part of our end-of-season mashup series, which means we're taking two of our favorite episodes and weaving them together, because when we looked at these two conversations side by side, we realized they were in conversation with each other in ways we didn't fully anticipate when we recorded them separately. And I'm always amazed by how some of our episodes serendipitously, did I say that right? Serendipitously speak to each other.
Good job.
As if we planned them to go together. And today we have two writers, Kwame Alexander and E. Carroll, who have inspired thousands, maybe millions of people by the way they have handled adversity and not only followed the yes, but embodied it, lived it, and spread it. And Brooke, I think I have to say that I didn't quite introduce you today. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy summer, everybody.
Yeah. And you were the one who noticed the common theme of this pairing. So I want you to tell me more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we look through all the guests of the previous year to think about who we want to highlight and why. And when I saw these two, I just think they're both so inspiring. And so it was somewhat organic, and I think at their core, both Kwame and E. are talking about the same thing, which is like it does cost something to tell the truth, but it also gives you something back. Mm-hmm. And so you just really see that. And they're both like very resilient. They've both been knocked down and gotten back up. And so I think I just saw something in their spirit that felt like they would be a good pairing. Kwame is a Newbery Medal-winning, Emmy Award-winning, #1 New York Times bestselling author of 45 books and counting. And, but he also spent the first 26 years of his life as a working writer before what he calls, quote unquote, an overnight success story. And then we have E. Carroll, journalist, author, and the woman who took on one of the most powerful men in the world in a court of law. And she has won twice. And, despite Trump's legal machinations and his intimidations and his weaselry, the Supreme Court recently upheld that one of those judgments is upheld, right? And that he needs to pay. I think it's $5 million. Mm-hmm. And I love every single headline. I mean, it's like I've been looking through Times and elsewhere, and it's like judge orders $5 million. Trump needs to release to E. Carroll. And I just really, really hope that someone forces him to give her the money, because obviously it's going to be like out of his cold, dead hands before she finally gets it.
Yeah, I think the headlines are actually the bigger punishment in many ways.
Yeah.
Like you said, we're all celebrating those, and we'll celebrate E. once she has the money. But in the meantime, I think she's enjoying sticking it to him as much as she will the actual cash. It's totally easy to applaud these two for saying yes, and that sounds easy to do. But I think we have to really pause and think about what it means to say yes. Day after day, year after year, when you're hearing a lot of no's, and these are two people who said yes to something just enormous, but in both cases that yes came at a cost. As you mentioned, it required showing up again and again in the face of rejection and doubt in Kwame's case. And in E. case, real danger. I actually worry about her and the danger that she's living in, because we're living in a type of civil war in this country. But what strikes me, listening back to these conversations, is how different their versions of yes look. Kwame's yes is exuberant and motivational and very forward-leaning. And E. yes has this almost amused quality, like she's daring the world to stop her and finding it slightly funny that anyone would try. But they also share a fundamental exuberance and self-confidence. I love the way E. when she's asked how she's doing, she says fabulous. That's just like her trademark.
No matter
and
what.
She is fabulous. I love hearing her talk about how fabulous she is. She left me essentially wanting to be E. and I think of her often because she's, as I mentioned, she's kind of fearlessly living in this relatively remote house with a shotgun by her bed. So don't mess with E. folks.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. It's such a perfect observation. And this makes sense because you are a little bit obsessed with E. and I've wondered about that a little over the year, but no, I get it. Yeah, you just want to be like her. And I think of both of them, also have a relationship to failure that most of us don't. Kwame was rejected all these times, 23 times for the crossover. That's the one that went on to win the Newbery, and then it became a series on Disney+. But on the very day that he found out he'd been nominated for 2 Emmys and the Disney Plus adaptation of that book, he got a call from a Disney executive. And you'd think it was a congratulatory call, but no, it was that the show was being canceled on the same day, right? So like, it's just kind of crazy, but that is the story of a creative's life, I think. And also just like, no matter what success we have, somebody's no is just around the corner. And I also want to say, like, he rides these waves, because I just saw Kwame in June in Chicago at ALA, the American Library Association. And his latest win is that he has his very own imprint, which is so awesome. Kwame Alexander Books, part of Sourcebooks. And when I just like marveled about how awesome this was to one of my friends who was standing there in the crowd with me, she was like, he's been doing this so long, like he's earned this. And I was like, yes, of course he has, you know, but he's earned it because he has stayed the course and he has never given up no matter what. And it's so inspiring. It was so nice to see him honored for all of his hard work. And I just really do love how undeterred he's been by rejection over all of these years. And, you know, I know it's a topic that you've thought a lot about, Grant. I mean, you've worked on a book about rejection, which, as you joke and I'll say, was rejected, but now has a second life, fortunately. So say a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's now in motion once again. More details to come. But, you know, I think like all writers, really, I'm a specialist or an expert in rejection. I always say that to be a writer is to be rejected. And that's why I want to plug this as well. We're going to have a special session on rejection in our publishing course that's coming up in September. And I think it's good to develop a rejection mindset, as I call it, so that you can not only weather rejections, but also find a way to use them to your advantage, because they are just part of being a writer. It will not go away. So listeners, if you're not picking up on this, that's a plug for you to check out our course on memoirnation.com under the classes tab in the navigation. And it's going to be very special. And, you know, I think of my rejection story, and it's very ordinary, very much like most writers, whereas E. Jean carried her story for nearly 30 years before she told it publicly. You know, it's obviously a different kind of fear of rejection when rape is involved, and the rejections, whether legal, personal, or familial, you know, they're just genuinely harrowing. And that fear of rejection has, you know, silenced so many. But E. Jean knew what Donald Trump had done to her in that Berghoff Goodman dressing room in 1996, and she wasn't going to be silenced, even though she had to take on, you know, the most powerful person in the country. You know, think about that. You know, her decision to go public and then go to trial and then write the memoir, Not My Type. You know, that's one of the biggest yeses I've ever heard of. You know, that's hundreds of yeses, each one harder than the last.
And what I love about the way that she wrote that book, and then what came through so clearly in our conversation with her, is that she refuses to be a victim on the page. You know, she is funny, she is snarky, she is breezy in parts. I find that incredibly moving, because underneath that breezy quality, of course, is this acknowledgement that she will live the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. And she has said that she never had sex again after what Trump did to her. You know, she basically lost any capacity for trust and intimacy. That is not asking for your pity, by the way. I mean, she's really just asking for people to pay attention. But there's still this refusal to perform victimhood while still being completely honest about the damage. And that is a particular kind of memoir courage. And, you know, speaking of connecting to Kwame, he does that in Why Fathers Cry at Night, his own memoir, which is prose, poems, letters, and recipes. He writes about the end of his marriage, a complicated relationship with his father, tensions with his daughters. But it's all in a form that holds that pain inside something larger and more generous. And so it turns out that these two, you know, like it was kind of a whim, but they really have like lots of points of intersection.
Yeah, that collage form of his memoir, that was one of the things I loved talking about with him, because it's a formal yes. You know, it's a decision to say that my story doesn't fit into a straight line, so I'm not going to force it into one. And what Kwame does, both in his poetry-driven novels for young people and in his memoir, is trust that the unconventional form can carry something true. And publishers told him there was no market for a novel in verse for boys about basketball. And really, who would have thought that there would be? But he proved them wrong in the most spectacular way possible.
And before we come to a close here, Grant, I'm going to offer one more thing that connects these two guests, which is that there's this claim, like what it looks like to claim your story when someone more powerful than you has tried to take it away from you, because both of them have done that. Trump tried to take E. Jean's story by calling her a liar, saying she wasn't his type, weaponizing his followers against her, all of the terrible things. And then what she did in the courtroom was she took it back, and then she made the title of her own book his insult, and then put her own amazing stylish face on the cover. And she said, like, this is mine. You don't get to define it. And Kwame did something similar when he talked about being a 26-year-old overnight success. Like he was claiming this whole arc. And it wasn't just like this super accolades that he's gotten, but he's talking about the 26 years and now more of grinding and rejection and doubt and working on it. And he told us that he woke up every single day saying yes to himself as a writer, even when the external world was not saying yes back. And then he quotes Maya Angelou in the book, who said or wrote, "You may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated. In fact, it may be necessary to encounter the defeats so you can know who you are, what you can rise from, how you can still come out of it." Oh, Dr. Angelou, what beautiful words.
She has so many beautiful words, and I love that, the necessity of the defeats. And not that defeat is fine, of course, not that it doesn't hurt. It hurts a lot, but it's doing something, Defeat is teaching you something about yourself that you really couldn't learn in any other way. And I think that's where both of these stories intersect most powerfully for us as memoir writers, because memoir at its core is the act of going back into our defeats and finding out, who we were in them. And both of them are essentially saying, my story matters. And that's our mantra. Your story matters. And that's the most important yes of all.
Absolutely. And on that note, let's get to the conversation. First up, Kwame Alexander.
Welcome, Kwame.
Thank you all so much for reading that very lengthy bio. I didn't write it.
There are so many good things in here, and you do so many different things in the world. So I had to read it all, definitely. Speaking of, because you say yes to a lot of things, obviously. Mm-hmm. When Brooke and I opened the show talking about our own history of saying yes. So that's our featured theme today because of your new book and your story. And I'm generally a say yes person, but it's a mysterious trait to me. I feel like I was born a writer and I was born a say yes person for the most part, but I'm not sure if I can even answer the why part of it, because I've had, periods of my life where I was veering into being at least a sometimes say no person. So I was wondering about your history with say yes. Like, have you always seen yourself as a say yes person, or did you develop yourself into a say yes person? So just what's your relation to say yes in general?
When I was 3 years old, my parents were in graduate school at Columbia University. We lived in a place called Morningside Heights. And my father, the quality time that we spent together was on the playground. And he would take me to shoot baskets, to shoot free throws. My father was a pretty big basketball star in high school, college, and the Air Force. So he would take me to shoot free throws. Now, I was 3 years old, y'all, so I wasn't, I was pretty small. And so the ball would never go anywhere near the basket, I'm told. But he kept making me shoot it. And there was this playground supervisor who from time to time would come over with the big wrench to lower the goal. And my father would tell him, no, stop. Nobody lowers my son's goal. He doesn't know he can't make it.
That is so cool.
I think it's in my genes, y'all. I literally believe that, and my father will say this to this day, that I was an experiment. And he'll sort of chuckle. But I believe that this idea, this notion of saying yes, is something that I was born or near birth, nurtured with. I think about, we had our library was in our garage, and my dad had milk crates and maybe about 5,000 books. And from time to time, he would ask me to go and clean up the garage, which was also our laundry room and sort of our storage. And I couldn't wait. Sometimes I'd volunteer. I want to go clean up. I'm going to clean out the garage because I knew I could sort of, check out all the books and read the spines. And I found that really interesting. And so I really embraced this notion of cleaning up the garage. And inevitably, I would not finish. I would never finish. I'd get halfway done. And I knew this going into it. I don't think this idea of saying yes has ever stopped me, even when I've known or suspected that there's a, and which has been most of the time, that there's a risk this may not work out.
Right.
I think it's in my blood, y'all.
Well, it's so interesting, that story about your father, because I was thinking saying yes in some ways is a kind of, I mean, not knowing you can't make it is the definition, right? You know, I remember my first basket. It was the same way. I sat around and shot probably 1,000 shots, you know, before finally one went in.
But that's the practice that it takes.
Exactly. Yeah, good one. That's a perfect metaphor.
And I love the idea of being an experiment because clearly it worked out well. And Grant and I also both love this notion, Kwame, of calling yourself a 26-year overnight success story. And I did some math on that. You were in your late 40s. You had a wife and children, and your novel and verse, The Crossover, had been rejected 22 times. And you'd already spent your life saying yes in all these different ways. But at this age and in your circumstances of having to care for others, I'm just curious what you were going through in terms of saying yes in that moment. And were you ready to give up?
I was 44 when the book got published, and I was 45 when my life changed. I have a little brother. Hopefully he's not listening. And he's had a journey, and he's wanted to be successful. Everyone in my family are artists. My sisters and my brother were all artists. And I remember he was in his early 40s, and he was just having a rough time, just sort of making it, as it were, whatever that means for him. And he needed a job. And I said, I got a friend who owns a restaurant, and he's looking for waiters. And my brother got so upset with me. Why would you think I'd want to do that? That's what you think of me? I'm an artiste. Like, why? I can't believe you would think I should be a waiter. Like, it was so beneath him. And I remember saying to him, dude, when I was 44, I was laid off from my job. And I was I was selling books at a farmer's market to pay the rent. And looking in the classified sections for any job, temp job. And I had written like 15 books by then. So I was a writer in my mind. And I found myself having to sort of put my ego in check and sort of do what was necessary. What did Denzel Washington say in that movie where he was quoting the famous poet, who I can't remember his name, but he said, do what you got to do so you can do what you want to do. And my brother just didn't get it. And I have no idea what your question is, Brooke, but I hope I'm answering it. That
you never gave up.
I never gave up. I saw what I knew what needed to happen. And I knew that if I stopped shooting, I definitely wasn't going to make it. But that period of time when The Crossover came out and I'd been laid off from my job and selling books at the farmer's market, I didn't know what was going to happen next. Like, I didn't know whether I'd have to go and wait tables or get a temp job. I just didn't know. But I also knew that I wasn't going to stop writing. I wasn't going to stop trying to promote my book. I wasn't going to stop pursuing this dream of being immersed fully into the writerly life and being able to provide for myself and my family. I knew I wasn't giving up on that. All the other stuff, I didn't know how it was going to play out, or when it was going to play out.
That's such a great story, especially because so many authors feel pressure to publish early in life. And if they haven't published early, they're not a real writer, or they don't have the skills to do it. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about The Crossover and your play with form and redefining forms. You know, like I think it was 22 or 23 publishers that had rejected The Crossover, something like that. You know, when I first found out about The Crossover, I wouldn't have guessed there was a market for poetry-infused sports themes children's book because, you know, boys probably wouldn't read poetry and girls probably wouldn't read about sports. And I think when you came out with that book, there weren't many novels in verse. You kind of set a new trend. And you also played with form in your memoir, Why Fathers Cry at Night. And Jekyll and Woodson called it part cookbook, part jazz concert, 100% deep and moving love song of a memoir. And you told the story in the form of prose, poems, letters, and recipes. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about why you decided to shape your story this way, almost like a collage, and what part does a saying yes attitude play in these kinds of aesthetic decisions?
That's like a million questions in one. Well,
sorry, I'll try to simplify.
Hey, Brooke, can you translate for me?
I'll do it. How does say yes influence playing with form?
By way of explanation, I will say that I did not set a trend for novels in verse. That before me, there was Karen Hess, who wrote Out of the Dust and won a Newbery Medal for it. It was a novel in verse about the Depression. There was Anne Berg, who'd written All the Broken Pieces. There was Walter Dean Myers, who had written 125th Street. There was Sonia Sones. There was Sharon Creech, who'd written Love That Dog. But to your point, and I don't know if this means anything, there had never been a book that focused on sports. I mean, All the Broken Pieces was about a kid who loved baseball, but I think basketball in the crossover became sort of the frame. It became the metaphor, in addition to sort of the literal, a big portion of the plot. So I think in that regard, and it featured a boy, and so it was a little different. But I don't know if I set a trend, but I sort of opened up a world, I think, in a way that the next year there were like 23 novels in verse published. Mm-hmm. So I get what you're saying about that. As it relates to the memoir, dude, my contract with Little Brown was for a book of love poems. So I was living in London at the time, and it was the pandemic, and I had nothing to do but write. And I was writing love poems. I was writing about family and love and friendship. I mean, that's how I started my career, y'all, like 20 plus years ago. It was writing love poems. So that's what the contract was for. And so I'm writing these love poems, and I'm sending them to my editor, Judy Klain at Little Brown, and she's now at Simon & Schuster, but she said, Kwame, I love this poem you wrote about your grandmother. And I had included a recipe, and she said, ooh, and I love that recipe. Can you tell me more about the story behind the recipe? Maybe you could write a prose piece. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I did that. And she said, oh, Kwame, you wrote a beautiful prose piece. How about you write another one? And she said, well, you got that one recipe. Maybe you should. And so she is a fantastic editor. I cannot take credit for figuring it out in advance that this book needed to be hybrid. But she nudged me. She pleasantly suggested this direction that I take with the book. And once I got into it, Brooke, then it was like, oh yeah, I get what I'm doing now. I know what I'm doing. This is prose. This is poetry. This is remembrance. This is recipe. This is conversation. This is hybrid. And that was exciting. And that took about 6 months of that back and forth sort of conversation for me to get it, because it was a book of love poems and it wasn't a memoir. But once I started doing all this, then it was like, oh, this is a memoir.
As someone who says yes, several people in my life who are close to me have been counseling me to say no more, or especially once I start complaining about something I said yes to, which sometimes happens, but I still keep the yes going. But so I'm curious, like on your author website is different than most author websites because you have author, speaker, educator, producer on it, and you're more than that. And so I'm curious, how do you find? Because I'm actually, part of the reason I say this is I'm not writing much these days because I'm doing so many other things. And so I'm like not saying yes to my writing. And it's really strange. This is the first time in my life I've been in this position. And so how do you make sure you're finding a balance and saying no to some things so you can keep saying yes to the things you care about?
Well, that's a work in progress, my friend, because genuinely and generally, when I'm asked to do something, my instinct is to automatically say yes. Mm-hmm. It pains me sometimes to say no, to turn something down,
Exactly.
Right.
And so, Brooke, we were talking earlier about I'm an extreme person. And I've found that I've had to adopt sort of a position that, okay, I am not going to do A. Like, I'm just not going to do it. And so therefore, everything that falls under A, oh, well, I got to say no, because I've already decided sort of the bigger thing ain't happening. As an example, I've been on the road since first grade. My daughter was in the first grade. I've been on the road. I must have visited about 1,500 schools and conferences and libraries around the world. And quite a few things I've missed. And she's a senior in high school this year. And we were in Brazil for spring break last March. And I told her, and I said, look, I'm coming off the road next year. You're a senior. I'm coming off the road. I've canceled all my travel. And she was like, Dad, really? I'm like, yeah. She's like, Dad, she said, first of all, how are you going to make money? I said, I'm good. We're good. But she said, Dad, that's so extreme. How about you just are home more? I was like, no, I'm coming off the road. And so she's like, I'll believe it when I see it. So school started right after Labor Day, and I am home. I am home every day. And so I got tested. It was like the universe said, we're going to see how serious you are. Mm-hmm. I got tested. I don't write for money, but I know my value and I know my worth, and I have to make a living. And I got invited to speak at some place. Mm. It was some serious, what do they say? It was some serious dough, man.
You wanted to say yes.
The colleges this kid's applying to, yeah, that would have been just right on time. And I didn't talk to anybody in the family about it. I just thought about it. I tried to figure out how I could do it, how I could get there, how I could come back, and it was just impossible. And finally, I told my booking agent no, and it was easier for me to get to that point because I had already decided I was going to be home. Mm-hmm. And so that was sort of the big heading, and all the subheadings they're just going to be no's. So I find it easy now to say no because I've made that decision. And I find that I'm happier, and I'm able to sort of spend more time, not just with my writing, but with her.
And now, E. Jean Carroll. E. Jean, you're in the company of two people with problematic dogs who would love to join you in some dog throwing. So welcome to Memoir Nation.
How fabulous. I'm also with two people who have excellent glasses on.
We all do, yes. We all have excellent glasses.
This is fabulous. Now, Grant, can I ask you a question?
You can.
I know what Brooke is going to say.
Okay.
Do readers and listeners and your followers send you notes about your glasses? Because I know they do for you, Brooke. I know they do.
Guests comment, but we are audio. And so we have to take a photo and make sure to put the photo on social and then ask for compliments.
Okay. So.
Well, Eugene, I'm going to ask you a question right back there, because it seems that you think Brooke's glasses are better than mine.
Well,
so the question was to me.
He has a fragile ego, Eugene. So
yeah, I like to keep up with Brooke.
Well, what happens is my friends, who all wear giant glasses now, and they're on TV, and what they receive are comments constantly about their glasses. And I'm wondering if this is just a thing now, that people are getting comments on their glasses, because Brooks glasses are ace.
They're really good. I'll concede Brooks are better than mine.
There are fabulous glasses. And you look like who you are, Grant.
I hope so.
A writer, a substantial intellectual.
I like that.
That's your deal.
That's what I'm going for. That's my deal.
Okay.
And I'm glad you used the word fabulous, because I was going to ask you how you're doing, but I know you're fabulous. That's part of the E. Jean Carroll brand.
That's it. I got into a big trouble for always saying I was fabulous, because when we got to the trial, the first trial with Donald Trump, is the defense attorney, Joe Tacopina, who's shaped like Popeye and has a voice like a shotgun. He laid me out in front of the jury for saying that I felt fabulous, because how can she feel fabulous when 27 years ago she was attacked by Donald Trump? That was their case. That was their old-timey 16th century case. If I'm fabulous, if I'm saying I'm great, if I, went to a party and laughed and having a good time, that proved that I could not have been assaulted by the president. Can you imagine anything more old-timey than that? Women who are assaulted should be in their house covering their heads with a dishcloth and never going out, never having a career, never seeing their friends. It was absurd. So thank you for asking, Grant.
We're going to dig into a lot of those issues, Eugene, but I wanted to start, since this is a podcast for writers, and I think you're fundamentally a writer, and I want you to have that identity more than any sexual assault by the president. I've read that you tried for 25 years to make it as a writer, and you faced, innumerable rejections, as we all do. So can you tell us about your journey as a writer and how you just kept persisting?
Grant, I tell you, I am puzzled by that, because I sent off my first letter to a major publisher. It turned out to be the Sears and Roebuck catalog when I was 12. I sent them a story pitch, and the story was a little girl cut out all the clothes in Sears and Roebuck, and lo and behold, they became real when they arrived. So I sent that pitch. I didn't hear back from them. And from that time on, for the next 25 years, I sent story pitches, ideas for articles, poems, plays, quizzes. I kept the U.S. mails flooded with my pitches. I just knew I wanted to be a writer, and I could write, but I could not convince the editors, the big time editors in New York. So I lived in this blizzard of negativity. I have no idea why I kept going. I have no idea. I don't know how I did it. How would I go on? No. And then in 1979, 25 years later, Marilyn Johnson, God bless Marilyn, picked off the Esquire magazine slush pile. And Brooke and Grant, you know what the slush piles were like back in the day? Mm-hmm. At Esquire, it was, I'm not exaggerating, 5 feet tall. That's how tall the slush pile was. And there were 3 of them. So that's 15 feet of slush pile. And for some reason, Marilyn Johnson plucked this manila envelope. She didn't have anything to do for about 2 minutes, opened it, and said, damn. And they bought it. And that's all I needed to get my size 11 into a door of a magazine. And then I was just off and running. You just need a clip. You just need to say you're published. And that was it. That was it.
Well, and Esquire is a pretty darn good byline to start with. So yes. Exciting. I want to ask you about the tone of your writing, Eugene. The tone, especially of Not My Type, is it straddles, on the one hand, an account of the trial from your perspective, and it's a transcript of that trial. But on the other hand, it's written in a gonzo journalistic way that includes humorous commentary. So how did you decide to write in this tone when you could have just done it in a more standard journalistic way?
Oh my God. I was in the middle of a high comedy. Nothing is funnier than a trial, and nothing is more hilarious than Donald Trump. So my tone never changed. I came out of the womb writing this way. The first piece I did for Esquire, the second piece I did for Outside, Brooke had the same tone. It's all, I cannot force that tone down. And I write what I see, and I happen to have a comedic view of the world. That's how I see the world.
Yeah.
Many great writers see the world with a negative aspect, and they are great writers. And then you have people like George Eliot, who sees the comedy and the drama, so those are the great writers. I just merely see it as a comedy. And also it keeps me happy when I'm writing. That's why the tone.
Well, thank you, Eugene. And I wanted to mention we had Amanda Knox recently on our show just a couple months ago, and she said it had an interesting quote that I want to run by you. She said, "Dwelling is non-constructive, suffering with no dividends. It happens when we refuse to accept the life we actually have." And I don't feel like you're a dweller by nature, and yet you experienced the pain of having to live with this story for nearly 3 decades after it happened. So were you dwelling on it, or how did you deal with it before telling the world about it, both through the trial and this memoir?
No, I agree with Amanda. Even while you're dwelling, you're reliving the experience, and so you feel bad. You just feel bad. And I, unfortunately, even though I had an advice column for 27 years, many of the people who wrote to me were therapists with their problems. But I, of course, never been to a therapist, never went to a therapist. That was a mistake. I should have gone to a therapist after the attack because I could not admit that I suffered. Could not admit it. Would never admit it to myself. Wouldn't admit it to anybody because I come from, like many of your listeners, I come from a generation. Well, I come from the silent generation, born in World War II. And our whole thing is chin up, girl. You smile and you go on. That's what you do. You do never complain about a man, never, because then you look like a slut. You can't do it. So, yes, I suffered. I learned how to deal with it myself, and I did receive, because of the trials, Trump's attorney hired a therapist, a psychologist. So then we had to hire one. They wanted to prove that I was a nutball making up the whole story. And we needed to prove that the drama actually happened. So we hired Robbie Kaplan, the great legal mind of her generation, my attorney, hired Leslie Leibowitz. And Leslie Leibowitz is one of the world's leading trauma experts. And Leslie, she created the sexual assault protocol for the U.S. Air Force, for instance. She ran the Harvard rape studies. She ran the Duke rape studies. This woman knows trauma. Leslie finally got me to center on what happened and how to deal with it. And so that was good.
I want to ask you about the focus on Trump's comment, not my type of woman. And you then decide to use that belittling comment as the book's title, thus giving it emphasis, and also a photo of you dressed stylishly and smiling. And it's impactful. And I also wanted to ask you about that choice and if you played a role in it, if that was what you wanted, if that was what the publisher wanted, if you could just tell us the backstory.
Well, as I was writing the book, of course, I came to the section where in 2019, when I came forward, Trump's reaction, first of all, he had 3 days from the White House calling me a liar. He called me a liar 26 times. On the third day, he said, as he was sitting behind the Resolute desk in the White House, she's not my type. So that was an amazing moment, particularly for the 24 women who had already come forward about Trump. So it stuck with me. Now, move ahead to 2022. Robbie Kaplan is deposing Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, getting ready for trial. He has said she is not my type so many times, okay? So Robbie says, I am about to show you a picture of E. Jean Carroll, okay? She says that 3 times. 10 minutes later in the interview, she says, to Trump, can you please identify the people in this photo? And Trump looks at me and says, looks at the picture of me and says, that's Marla. That's my wife.
Wow.
He probably lost the case right there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It was, we put on 11 witnesses. So that, it so clinched it. It so cinched it. I opened the book. On page 1, it says, she's not my type. On page 2, it says, that's Marla, that's my wife. So there's my title. And it stands for everything every man has ever said for the last 4,000 years. When when a woman comes forward and accuses a powerful man, or not even a powerful man, any man. Are you kidding? She's, why would I touch that? Look at her.
So therefore, too, the image of you, this powerful image of you smiling, I mean, it seems to, kind of fly in the face of it. So, it's very intentional and it's evocative at the same time.
Well, St. Martin's chose the cover. Mm-hmm. And Jen Ederlin, the president of St. Martin's, apparently, I wasn't there. I let them handle that. They know way more than I do. But apparently they had 5 or 6 photos laid out for possible cover. And Jen just pointed and said, look at that smile. That's the cover.
Perfect.
So, the cover was very important.
Well, Eugene, a big part of writing any memoir is dealing with its after effects, because all memoirs hold consequences, but yours holds more consequences than most, in part because of the nature of Trump's supporters. Like when you go up against Trump, there's this massive army of trolls out there poised to attack. And so has that affected your life in any way, or do you feel safe?
I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about you guys. Swear to God. I am right now. It feels like sort of the end of the world is coming. The world feels very shaky right now. I'm worried about women losing our rights over our own bodies. I'm worried about education. I'm worried about you. I'm not worried about me. I'm fine. I got my watchdogs out there. So I'm good. Also, I have a shotgun by my bed. So, we cannot be afraid. This is a time for every single one of your listeners who are, I think most of them have great understanding and are writers. Mm-hmm. Take it from me. This is not the time to try to feel safe. Now is the time to get up and resist Trump. And if your listeners are writers, please start writing on social media about your resistance to Trump. It will help. It will help.
Yeah. Speak truth to power and get your voice out there for sure.
Yeah, and don't be afraid. Jesus Christ, really, come on.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and we hope your summer writing or your summer daydreaming is going well, and we hope you'll return this September ready for a couple of our big programs. We've got 2 big things happening, at least 2 big things. To start, we're offering an 8-week intensive class to get you ready to publish your memoir, from the proposal to the pitch to the query letter to actually submitting, and everything in between. And we're even hosting a Pitchapalooza event with the book doctors Ariel Eckstedt and David Henry Sterry. And that event is free and open up to our entire community. Also, of significant note, we're going to start getting ready for our 2nd annual January story, a challenge to write 500 words of your memoir each day in January. So rest up, take a swim, enjoy the summer heat, and come back ready to write your story.